You're listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
So have we just reached the point where we're not allowed to ask any questions? We're not allowed to wonder, like, what is the meaning of this plot point? Or, it doesn't really make sense because we reached a point of saturation in the discourse of talking about pop culture, which I've been talking about movies and pop culture and TV shows since I could speak, on the schoolyard, on the bus ride, on a field trip, hanging out with friends, having a soda. Like, that's what I've done. That's why when I sit down to talk, I can just go because I've been doing it for so long. But now we've reached a point because of social media, because of the horrors of social media. We're not allowed to criticize these properties anymore, because to criticize them, they put you in a box like, oh, you're a this or a that because you don't appreciate blah, 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 blah. No. I always approach things from a storytelling perspective. What story is it? And I've always said that it's the director where all the blame falls. If the scene is bad, if it doesn't make any sense, it's the director's fault, because ultimately, as someone who has directed things myself, the director is responsible. He directs the action, he directs the emotion, he directs the flow, the tone of the film. Now, I know some of these Marvel movies are cookie cutter hiring jobs where they tell the director, look, we're going to hire you to make this movie with the idea that you're just going to direct the little tiny scenes in between the action because all the action has already been pre-visualized in the computer, and we just need now the scenes to link them all together. And that's what you're going to do. That's basically what Sam Raimi did for the Doctor Strange Madness multiverse movie. Because how do you direct it? Do you think he sat down with somebody and said, okay, now I want a world where they turn into liquid and then we're going to move into No. He just directed the characters talking to each other and the overall tone and flow of the film. This is just the way it's done. Go back to Return of the Jedi. There's a TV show called it's Magic of Monsters, something like that. It's narrated by Mark Hamill. And they show you a video camera footage of the speeder bike chase done with action figures. And they're actually getting the camera shots, getting the angles. How does it cut? How does it flow? Richard Marquand, the director of Return of the Jedi, didn't direct the speeder bike chase. He directed the scenes in between the action. And if the actors are on the bikes, he's off camera telling them, like, what's their motivation. Like, this is, okay, look to your left, look to your right. But he's doing it according to the storyboards, which were put together by the guys at ILM. That's just how movies are made. But have we reached a point where to even hint at criticizing something is to make you a bad person? Because, Jeff, they worked really hard on it. Yeah, I've no doubt that these people who make movies get up and they shuttle over to the warehouse or whatever that ILM thing is called, where they actually project the set behind the actors. Like, it's not even a green screen or a blue screen anymore. It's actually a projection of, like, Boba Fett's ship back there, so they all can walk in front of it. And the actors can actually see the set going on behind them and help their performance. I have no problem with that. I get that the way movies are made, it's easier to stare at something than a green wall. Look at that picture of Ian McKellen on the set of The Hobbit, where he's acting with complete green fabric. He looks like he wants to die, because he's an actor who's used to looking into another performer's eyes and seeing the emotion and getting it back, getting the feedback while he gives it. And that's how movies, and that's, how great movies are made. But they're not made like that anymore. They're just factory assembly line assemblages, and it's made for the masses, and you're not even allowed to criticize them, which I find odd. Like, okay, I'll give you some examples. You're like, Jeff, why don't you give some examples? Okay, I will, inner voice. I enjoy Stranger Things. I've watched it since season 1 because, of course, when they announced it, they said Winona Ryder's going to be in it. So, of course, I'm going to watch it. Hey, it turns out to be good. That's a bonus, too. So now we're on season 4, and since one of my kids is very into Stranger Things and stayed up all night watching it because we're at a point in pop culture where if you don't watch it immediately, it will be spoiled for you by some idiot on the internet. Yahoo News the next day, I think at like 6 a.m., 7 a.m., already had full spoilers for Stranger Things as a news item. I got a question. Why can't these streaming services, since they're making their own rules, there's no rules to a streaming service except what you make it, why can't they just premiere these things at, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock at night? And you could watch a couple before you go to bed and go, oh, that's great. I'm going to go to bed when I get up tomorrow. If it's good, I'm going to watch another one. No, it's like, no, we're going to release them all at midnight. Well, that's great. Now I've got 8 hours of stuff I have to watch. And if I don't want it spoiled, because at this point of the game, how are you supposed to stay off the internet? You can't stay off the internet. The world is run by being on the internet, and you're going to have some idiot spoil it for you. So you have to watch, you absorb it. Go back to one a week. I know the Star Trek shows are one a week, but the Netflix stuff is like, here it is all at once. You have to slurp it up or be spoiled by it. Great. Thanks a lot, guys. It's funny when they talk about binge watching. I don't get the binge watching. I've talked about that on the show before. I'm not a binge watcher. But as much as I enjoy Stranger Things, it does leave a lot of questions which they're never going to answer because you're just supposed to, I don't know, what is it? Turn your brain off, Jeff. Turn your brain off and enjoy the show. Yeah, well, at the finale of the series, the season, Eddie, the Dungeons and Dragons heavy metal guy, which I went to high school with a guy just like that, he gets up on the top of the trailer and he starts playing Metallica on an electric guitar so that the bats can all be attracted to him, and then they can go get Vecna. Like, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's all craziness. And the question I have is, how is there electricity in the Upside Down? How can they have electricity down there? Who's running the electricity? Is there a power plant? Is there an upside down version of the power plant that's like got a guy going, well, it's 4 a.m. I better make sure all the turbines are on. Like, give me a break. They never explain it. They don't run a cord from the regular world into the upside down, which they should have. They just plug everything in and it works. It's like, well, that's convenient. You could almost, if you didn't like the regular world, you could move into the upside down. They have places to live. They have power. There's no rent due. You could just live there according to their rules. Doesn't that seem silly? Like, he just plugs in a guitar, and we're supposed to be so in awe of he's doing a heavy metal album that we're just supposed to ignore, like, he's using electricity in another dimension. I just wish there had been one scene of explaining how they're going to do it. And you know what? Maybe there was. Maybe I missed it. You can't blame me, because by the end of the slog through this entire season, I was exhausted because, again, you have to keep up on these things. You have to watch them. You have to keep watching them, or they're going to get spoiled for you. And normally I don't care about spoilers. You can tell me how a movie ends. It's not going to change my enjoyment. But sometimes, like, this stuff, they do have good twists and turns, and you want to be surprised by it at least. You don't want to just click on, because the Yahoo thing is like, you won't believe, and then they just have it in the headline. I can't believe this guy died in season 4, and you're like, you guys couldn't wait like a couple of days? A couple of days not to get those clicks? Give me a break. So that was my gripe on Stranger Things, is where'd they get electricity? You know, because they have to find these elaborate ways to get into the underground, the upside down. I keep calling it the underground. I keep thinking of Labyrinth, because he sings that song about being in the underground. But I watched all this crap, and I'm just so bored by all of it. I took Ryder to see Thor: Love and Thunder. It cost me nearly $40 to go see this movie. That's before popcorn, before drinks. That's just tickets to see it. And when you shell out that much dough, you hope to be at least a little entertained. But man, Thor: Love and Thunder was so dumb. every scene was worse than the one before it. That guy, Taiki Waititi, his name, he needs to take a break because his shtick has officially gotten old. And I know that happens with a lot of creative people, that they reach a point where they're oversaturated. Go look at Jude Law in the early 2000s. He was in every single movie that came out, one after the other. It's like the guy just was hell-bent on making as many movies as he can, which, hey, I don't blame him. If they're willing to pay you, go ahead, because you get paid to do the movie, and then you get paid forever for TV rights, cable rights, DVD rights, streaming rights. You get a check, you get a check, you get a check. So I get why they do it. But at some point, you got to go, look, I'm oversaturated. I need to take a break. And Taiki Waititi has got to take a break because he's so one note. And that one note has served him well. You know, Thor Ragnarok was great. It was a breath of fresh air. And like, oh, these Marvel movies all look the same. Oh, my God, this one looks totally different. But I am here now asking everyone who works in pop culture to officially retire the mermaid unicorn color palette. I don't know when this came about. It's fairly recent, but like muted pastel purple, pastel pink, these colors have come to signify mermaid and unicorn. I can't explain what it is, but if you want to know what I'm talking about, go to any Five Below store, because Five Below is Thor Love and Thunder as a store, and Thor Love and Thunder is Five Below as a movie. The whole color palette is gross. It looks like vomit, like you ate too much cotton candy and now you're vomiting this stuff up. I can't stand it. And boy, does this movie, I talked earlier about a director picking a tone. You know, movies are either, this is a comedy, this is a gross out comedy, this is a dark comedy. Thor, Love and Thunder, couldn't tell you what it was, because as silly as it is, and it's very silly, it also has scenes of Jane Foster's character dying of cancer, and they're played, like the cancer scenes are played for real. She, in the film, she has cancer. She is going to die. And then it rebounds in these goofy, silly scenes of, you know, chaos and quips, and I felt myself confused by the whole affair. Like I didn't know what the movie was trying to tell me. Plus, it has a sequence. One of the storylines is Christian Bale's character is trying to kill gods. And you're like, whoa, we got a lady with cancer. We have a guy having a midlife crisis, because that's basically Thor's storyline. He's having a midlife crisis. And then we also have a guy intent on killing gods. Oh my goodness. What kind of movie is this? I'll tell you what it is. It's a mess. Thor Love and Thunder is a mess of a movie. It opens with Christian Bale traipsing through the desert in a scene that looks like it's just, no one's going to get this reference but me, but it looks just like the scene out of Star Trek V. Star Trek V opens with a guy who looks just like that character in the desert as a horseman approaches. Now, in this case, in the Thor movie, he's got his daughter with him, and his daughter is dying and then dies in the desert, and then he buries her, and then he miraculously finds an oasis full of water and trees and greenery, and he's there as this stark, pale juxtaposition of a guy dying next to this lush oasis. And again, tone, because there are like flower people that talk to him, and then the god that he worships actually shows up. Like, he's a guy who has devoted his life and his daughter's life to the end to a god who shows up. And wouldn't that be a revelation? Like a proclamation that everything you believed was true? Now, he takes it the other way, like, I did everything for you, and you let my daughter die, so now you must die. And there's a corpse there of another god. And, okay, so Christian Bale's character tells the god that he hates him, he has worshipped him, and it's got him nothing. And then the god like picks him up and chokes him and says, you are nothing to me. You mean nothing. You are insignificant. And by the way, right over there is a dead god next to a sword that can kill gods. So Bale just picks it up and kills the guy. Like, it's weird to walk into a movie and in the first scene lose the audience. Because it's so illogical for a guy to say, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. There's a gun with bullets in it. Oh, you're going to shoot me? Why? Because I said I hated you and that your life was meaningless because you worshiped a God that didn't care? And then he kills him. He kills him. And then he vows to, like, kill all the gods. Okay, so now we have our plot. And the plot is he's going to kill all the gods. And at the same time, Thor is getting back in shape because he was a big fat guy at the end of Endgame. And all the marketing materials for this movie proclaimed it to be basically a sequel to Guardians of the Galaxy. And that's not me confusing it. If you look at all the marketing materials, the Guardians are in it a lot. If you go to the toy aisle, they have a 3-pack of 12-inch figures, and you get Thor, Groot, and Star-Lord. So I'm not confused when I say that this movie was marketed as an adventure movie with Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy. And that may have been what the intention was. But I think Chris Pratt's agent or Chris Pratt himself said, look, I can't be the second banana in this movie. I am the star of my own film series. And now that Jurassic Park is winding down, I need to concentrate on Guardians. And I can't concentrate on Guardians if I'm playing second fiddle in a Thor movie. So these characters exit early. Within the first 10 minutes, the Guardians take off and leave Thor alone, which, again, I was very confused. Like, okay, so it's not the movie you promised me in the trailer. It's the same confusion I had in Rogue One, where Rogue One seems to be a movie about a girl who may or may not be a bad guy. And which side will she choose? And are they going to help the rebels destroy the Death Star? That's the trailer, but it's not the movie at all. So this movie is not the trailer at all. So again, okay, so we have to look at it on its own merits. And that's what we have to do. So then Thor goes around on these adventures, getting back in shape and losing all of his movie weight, which was just makeup anyways. And he's still in love with Natalie Portman. So it's him and the rock guy, and he's still in love with Natalie Portman. Okay, and then for some reason there's a bookend where the rock guy is telling the story to children, and it's straight out of Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. It just seems like we've reached a point in popular culture that they just borrow everything. They just take everything from other movies, they mix it a little, but not in a Quentin Tarantino way where you're like, whoa, this looks like something I've never seen. And instead it's like, oh, this looks like something I've seen before. Okay. Thor decides to go around the world, around the galaxies, and then we cut back to New Isengard on Earth, where Valkyrie is now king for some reason, and it's been turned into a tourist attraction with rides on the flying boats and touristy characters, and for some reason an ice cream shop called Infinity Cones, and you go, wait a minute, this is you're making a joke about half the population being blipped away by a madman and being gone from existence for 5 years. I don't know if it's exactly what you would name an ice cream parlor after. I mean, you wouldn't name it after the Holocaust, but I guess nobody got to come back from the Holocaust, but they did come back from the blip. I mean, they even call it the blip in the Spider-Man movie, Far From Home. So it just seems, again, the tone is all over the place. And so the Christian Bale God killer guy, he shows up at New Isengard, and at the same time, Natalie Portman's character has figured out that she can cure her cancer intermittently, like kind of get better, if she goes and looks at the remnants of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and wills them back together. So in the course of the fierce action sequence, the Christian Bale character attacks the town. He lures all the children out with these big shadowy creatures. Natalie Portman shows up as the mighty Thor with a helmet on. Thor shows up. They start fighting. They go from no action to the middle of action in a really bad jump cut. It's one of the few times I leaned over to Ryder and I said, did I blink and miss something? How is it already an action scene? There was no build up to it. It just goes bang. Everybody's fighting. Everybody was kung fu. Right, okay. So Thor and Jane, who's got a helmet on, like that's not even part of it. You think maybe she's going to be coy about it and run off and there's going to be a little bit of mystery? And the Thor's like, who was that girl here dressed like Thor? And they're like, I don't know. And he's like, I need to find out where she's from. Like a little bit of the Batgirl thing in Batman where we were never really certain. Batman never really knew that Barbara Gordon was Batgirl until the Killing Joke sequence. But in this, she just takes her helmet off. And she's like, hey, it's me. And he's like, oh, it's you. You're like, oh, okay. And then for some reason, I hate when they introduce things this late in the game. And I understand you have to. Like in Back to the Future 2 and 3, we're introduced to the idea that Marty does not like to be called chicken and he has to overcome it. But that's never in the first film. Okay, well, you can't just have a character who's flawless. They have to have something to overcome. They have to have flaws. There has to be new material introduced. I get all of that. But the stuff they introduce is earth-changing. It just changes everything. So if Mjolnir could reform itself for some reason, why didn't it? Why did Thor have to go and face the power of a star in Infinity War and make Stormbreaker? If Mjolnir could reform itself, and you go, well, Jeff, that's not part of the plot. But it is part of the plot because it's also revealed that these two weapons are sentient. Like they're alive and they have thoughts because when the hammer comes back, the axe gets jealous. And you're like, what? The axe is jealous of the hammer. And it makes for fun comedy, except when you go, well, if the hammer could come back, boy, Thor could have really used that. He could have killed Thanos much quicker. And I get, look, that's the plot. I'm not arguing that with you. What I'm arguing is the retconning of these things without any thought as to how it would have affected earlier. Like that whole stupid movie, The Eternals, is like, well, we didn't intercede in Thanos because we were told not to. So you let everybody die, even though you guys are telling me at this point you have the power to have killed him and prevented it. You can't have characters like this. You can't have storylines like this. It comes off callous. It comes off like you don't know what the hell you're doing. The plot of the movie is two-pronged. Thor figuring out his emotions for Jane, and the Christian Bale God killer guy figuring out how to kill all the gods in one fell swoop. So Thor and company head to the city of the gods up in the sky somewhere where all the gods hang out. And this is where, like, it just comes off again, just really callous and silly. Because they have some real gods there that were revered once in a lifetime somewhere on Earth. Then they have silly gods, like there's a god of dumplings. So there's a dumpling with eyes. There's a guy that's just a head. And then we're introduced to Zeus, played by Russell Crowe. And he's just this gross, fat, disgusting, lewd man. And there's many, many jokes about who's going to get invited to the orgy, who's being disinvited to the orgy, and why aren't they having an orgy now? And I'm like, okay, we get it. Guys want to have an orgy. This is great. These are movies made for, like, children. You know that, right? Like, if you want to make a R-rated superhero movie, like Watchmen, I'm all for it. But these movies, with its color palette of unicorns and mermaids, is aimed at children. So I don't get all the orgy jokes. I mean, I'm not a prude in any way, but again, tone. And then there's an offhand joke about Jesus being there, like he's the god of carpentry. Okay, well, I don't know about that. That seemed weird. It just seemed weird. And then there's an extended scene where Zeus flicks away Thor's clothes and he just stands there naked while they're all leering at him. Hey, it's a funny joke. I get that it's funny, having written some funny stuff myself once upon a time, maybe once or twice. I get why that's funny. But in the hyper weird culture that we're in today, would that joke have worked if it had been Natalie Portman's character? If everybody was like leaning over to look, like I'm leaning over, like if you know the scene in A Fish Called Wanda where John Cleese is nude and they show the little girl like sort of looking in the general area of his crotch, it wouldn't have been the same. And instead, while he's nude, they're just eating grapes and like enjoying the show. There's nothing wrong with that. I am not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that the people that complain the loudest are always silent on stuff like this. And I find that very interesting. I just find it fascinating. Zeus is like adult, and it's Russell Crowe speaking in a very weird Greek accent. He sounds like Kojak's assistant, the one that was always throwing plates around. But they're there to recruit an army. And Zeus basically says, it'll be fine. We don't need an army. It's all good. They're not... I expected like a scene where they're leaving the city having been rebuffed by Zeus, and a ragtag group of other like lower gods are like, look, we'll help you. We're going to help. And it would be like this misfit team. And I thought, that might be fun. Like, when Jack Sparrow puts a crew together in Black Pearl, and you're like, it's like the Misfits. I like that. The underdogs. But it isn't. Instead, they just use the sequence to get Zeus's thunderbolt. And he's such a god and such an all-powerful being that you think he's dead. I mean, it turns out he's not dead in the after-credit sequence. But he, for all intents and purposes, to the audience, he's dead. In like one fell swoop, he's dead. But if he's not dead, why doesn't he pursue them? They've taken his thunderbolt weapon, his action figure accessory. It was just stupid. Then there's an extended boat scene, and I haven't even mentioned the terrible, terrible effects in this movie. The children are being held somewhere in another universe in a big bone cage that looks like it was a Ral Partha lead piece that I built for Dungeons & Dragons circa 1986. But they can communicate by sort of projecting themselves back and forth. So at one point, one of the kids just projects his face, and I swear it looked like something from Thumb Wars or VeggieTales or any of those movies where an inanimate object... Annoying Orange. That's what it looked like, Annoying Orange. Like anything where it's just a really cheap after effect. And I thought... I was actually startled by it because I was like, this is an expensive Marvel movie. What the hell is that effect? They could have just had the kid talking and cut back and forth like it's in his mind. But instead, they actually put his face floating in the air. It was very cheap, and it takes you out of the movie. It really takes you out of the movie. There's some nonsense about Natalie Portman trying to come up with a good catchphrase for her hero. I guess that plays well with someone. It just came off to me as like, they're out of ideas. They're literally out of ideas. They are pursuing the children, pursuing Christian Bale's character, and it all turns out to be a ruse, a hoax, that he's only luring Thor to some area because Thor's axe can open the Bifrost, and it can also open a door to another dimension where this one singular God exists who, if you ever reach him, will grant you anything you wish. Talk about plot armor. They've got a magic genie at the end of a rainbow Five Below bridge. And that's the plot. Christian Bale's going to steal the axe, open the door, make the wish to kill all the gods, and then his job is done. Okay, I ask you, because he does steal the axe, and the axe does open the doorway. And the question I have is, I thought, Sir Director, that 45 minutes ago, you told me that these weapons were sentient, that they had emotions and feelings and were jealous. And so if that's the case, why would the axe willingly help the bad guy try to kill everybody? Because Thor will be one of those gods who dies. You see what I'm saying about how nobody gives these things a second pass? Nobody gives them a look. They're so intent on bright colors and action sequences that the stuff in the middle, the stuff that really counts, they just don't put any effort into it. Because they think we're just going to be dazzled by yet another beautiful person battling a CGI monster of some sort. Yawn. Totally. So Thor gets there. The axe is being used like the drill in Die Hard, where they keep cutting to the drill, and he's like, "We're down. We've got through another lock. How are you doing now? We're down through another lock. When we get to the final lock, we're going to need a miracle. It's Christmas, Theo. It's a time of miracles." Thor rescues the children, and then he does something so inexplicable. Again, it's like they just don't care about the audience, because we're supposed to be so razzle-dazzled. We don't notice that in order to defeat the bad guy, Thor deputizes all the children with lightning to become like mini Thors. What? To become mini Thors? What the heck are you talking about? If he could do that, why didn't he do that in any other movie? Oh, I know, because they hadn't thought of it yet. I get that. But again, it's like the Star Wars sequels. The sequel trilogy where Rey keeps coming up with all these powers she didn't have before. She can resurrect the dead. Well, that would have come in handy. And Thor can deputize and make little Thor people. Well, that would have come in very handy, wouldn't it? We really could have used that 2 movies ago. And if there was a god sitting at the end of some rainbow bridge that Thor can open with his axe, why didn't they just open that and say, "Hey, can you bring everybody back from Thanos?" And the god's like, "All hell Jambi, the wish is granted." But they didn't do that because they hadn't thought of it yet. So the door gets open, the god is revealed, and Christian Bale's character, Thor appeals to him like, "Don't do this. Well, instead of killing all the gods, why don't you use your wish to bring your daughter back?" And you're like, well, that's the only sensible thing anybody's said in this movie. Why doesn't Natalie Portman wish her cancer away? He makes the wish, he dies, the daughter comes back, and then Natalie Portman dies of cancer and turns to dust. What the hell? The tone again is all over the place. The rock guy is destroyed. He's just a talking face for the rest of the movie. And again, these are cute visual things. They're fun things that happen. But in the grand scheme of the whole story, it's not enough because the story collapses. All these holes make the plot so Swiss cheese that the plot collapses under it. You could have done this, you could have done that. Well, we could have really used that before. I thought they were all going to pick up a piece of the rock guy and that would be a living weapon, since it was a living rock a few seconds ago. But instead, Thor just ignites them all with lightning. And then Thor adopts the child, and they live in some other universe where her name is Love and his name is Thunder, and that's the Love and Thunder of the title. It was all very dumb. And what a terrible thing to say about a movie, because movies aren't accidents. I've said that before. It takes hundreds of people getting up at 4 a.m, months on end, to make these things. And it must be so sad to go to the theater and go, "That's what you did with my time? That's what you did? Give me a break." And then the after credit sequence shows Jane Foster getting to go to Valhalla, and there's Idris Elba. You're like, "I'm here to welcome you to Valhalla. You died in battle." And you're like, you ever seen that movie? Nobody's seen it. The Lovely Bones, where heaven, and this little girl, Susie Salmon, dies and goes to heaven. It's like this wonderful place. You're like, wait a minute, Susie Salmon was murdered. Her going to heaven should not be a good thing. It should be a tormented thing, because her family was left behind on earth to tear each other apart. And in this film, Thor was in love with her and watched her fade away. Doesn't matter where she went. What matters is she's not here. Again, the tone is all over the place. And the tone of these movies sucks because they can't figure out what kind of movie they want to make. Can we have one Marvel movie where the bad guy is just a bad guy? Can they have Doctor Doom show up and go, look, I'm a bad guy and I'm going to do terrible things because I like doing terrible things? Because every one of the Marvel villains is either this sad sack who's trying to do something that's revealed late in the game, or he's misunderstood, or he finds redemption at the end. We just want to see a bad guy be a bad guy. When Hans Gruber falls off of Nakatomi Plaza, everybody in the theater clapped and erupted because the bad guy died. That's the way it should be. And instead, we're stuck with all these wishy-washy writers who can't just commit to a guy being evil. We have superheroes because they fight evil. Not every one of the villains has to be misunderstood. The Joker can fall to his death from the top of the church. The Penguin can die and slide into the river. These things can happen. But we've reached this weird moment in pop culture where they keep writing all of these sympathetic villains over and over again. Or the villains are so popular, like Loki, that they get their own crappy show. And we're going to endure 6 to 8 hours of them goofing around without really being a bad guy anymore. It's too bad Heath Ledger died, because we sure could use a bad guy like that who's just pure, chaotic evil for evil's sake. And Batman is the good guy. Because all of these sympathetic guys, I mean, even at the end of Endgame, which I think is a fantastic movie, Thanos just sort of sits there like Shrek and just fades away. And what we really wanted to see was, I guess during the course of that fight, they do trade blows, back and forth. But you ever seen a movie where you just want the bad guy? He's done such terrible things. You just want to see him get beat up by the good guy. That's good versus evil, folks. That's the stories that last. At the end of Lion King, Scar's dead. They don't go, Scar, he was so misunderstood. They're like, no, Scar was evil, Scar died, and we're all better off that he's dead. And then we need more of that. Oh, God, I'm calling for evil.
Thanks for listening to 91 Reasons. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Find us on Facebook. Is anyone even still listening?